Hey folks, today we're talking about my Fujifilm X100V and 1 year of ownership of that camera. So watch on and see what we talk about. So if you thought the X-T4 and other Fujifilm cameras felt like retro cameras or like film cameras, the X100V takes things just a step further. It has quite a premium feel to it, but at the same time it makes you feel like you're using an old rangefinder camera, and it is a dream to use. I bought this camera specifically because I wanted something discreet for street photography, and it really works well for street documentary. The 23mm focal length is spot on. That's 35mm equivalent. It's super compact camera, it's lightweight, and you've got everything you need in one camera and a plethora of accessories that you can get for the camera too to customize it. It's got quite a following, this camera, almost like a cult camera. So the Viewfinder is again that retro style. It's a rangefinder. You can use it as an optical viewfinder where it has just a heads-up display with the basic information on of the exposure settings that you've got. You can switch it to fully electronic, where it's a 3.6 million dot electronic viewfinder, same as X-T4, excellent quality, superb clarity. But also you can switch it to what's called a hybrid viewfinder, where you get mostly optical, but you also get a little tiny display, takes up about 1/8 of the screen, which actually lets you see the exposure as the camera sees it. So you've got this hybrid viewfinder, and it works really, really well. And it's very refreshing to use because when you have it on optical, it takes you back to your DSLR days and your SLR days, where the everything was just an optical viewfinder. Your exposure was done by meters. You didn't have this exposure simulation that you have on modern mirrorless cameras. You've got the best of all worlds. And now not only have you got that wonderful retro feel and retro viewfinder, one thing you often need when you're out and about with a camera, especially if you're doing long exposures, is an ND filter. And of course this camera has a built-in full-stop ND filter as well. You see what I'm getting about having everything built in? It's retro style, yet with a flick of a switch on the front of the camera you can engage the ND filter and you can do long exposures if you wish, which again can be quite useful for street photography if you want to, blur something out or you're in extremely bright light. Because moving on to the shutter speed, as we'll talk about in a minute, you'll find why the ND filter is quite important. So the X100V has a leaf shutter. It's extremely quiet, but they are limited in their maximum shutter speed. I think it's 1/2000th of a second. So there are quite a few restrictions on them in that respect. So with your ND filter, you can remove some of those restrictions by obviously, if it's a very bright scenario, you can knock it down by 4 stops, and you're not going to get into that problem. But it is a very discreet shutter, and one of the other advantages is that you don't have, if you're using flash, you don't have flash synchronization issues. A leaf shutter can fire the flash at pretty much any shutter speed that the camera is capable of, unlike a standard flash where you'll see the curtain come across the shutter and you'll get like banding on the picture. You just don't get that with a leaf shutter. And as I said before, I can't mention enough, it's so quiet, people don't realise you're taking a picture, and for street photography that's quite important. With a 23mm lens, you're going to be pretty close to people. But people just think you're snapping things. They think of it as a compact camera. They don't see it as a pro camera. Its retro styling, especially in silver, best colour, really adds to that. So the design of the camera is just sublime. I mean, as I said, just as I touched on before, I got it in silver because I really like that retro style. You've of course got the exposure compensation dial. You've got a shutter speed dial, but combined into that, you pull it up, and there's you can choose the ISO as well from that. You've got a tilting screen on the back. Essentially everything's there. It's quite minimalist, the controls you've got, but everything you need is on that camera. And it's a joy to use. Again, the exposure triangle is right where you want it, just like the X-T4 on there. But if you look at some film cameras as well, you'll see that they had a similar arrangement on Fujifilm cameras for the ISO dial. You used to set the ISO of the film we were using by pulling up and twiddling a little dial. So there's little touches like that that give you that retro feeling that the camera actually that has. They make the camera an absolute joy to use. You know, it's as much fun taking the pictures as it is you know, setting the camera up. I just thoroughly enjoy using the camera. It's quite the experience. Now, as I said, although the camera's got quite a light weight to it, it's not too heavy. The grip is small, but it's enough, and it doesn't want to be too big, because in this instance you can forgive it having a huge grip, because the cameras of that era that it's emulating didn't have a large grip, so it's plenty to hang on to with the camera. The camera's solidly put together, metal construction, you know, pretty much throughout for the chassis. Obviously there are some plastics on it with the buttons, but it, you know, it deserves that. It's a premium build. It's fully weatherproofed, apart from, you'll notice on the front of my camera I've added a UV filter. Not something I normally do, but this aftermarket UV filter completes the weather sealing. The only problem with this camera is, without a UV filter on the front, or some form of screw-on filter, it actually isn't weather sealed at the front, and that's just down to the way the camera's designed. So you need to look into that if you're buying this camera, is look into the options you've got available, either through official Fujifilm aftermarket products, or aftermarket products that are made by other manufacturers that you can put on in the way of ND filter, well, not ND filters. It could be an ND filter, it could be a polarizer. Most people put UV filters on, or put on customized lens hoods, which have a sealing effect on the camera. And it's just the way the camera's designed. And you know, I paid about £25 to get that hood. It's got a miniature hood and a UV filter on, and it doesn't affect the image quality at all. And in fact, it actually adds to the camera look. It makes it look even more vintage. Now, essentially, the autofocus on this camera is pretty good. It's based on the same autofocus as the X-T3 and X-T30 have. In fact, the innards of this camera are pretty similar to that, although you've got slight enhancements like 11 frames per second burst rate on the camera. So you're mostly going to be using this for stills, not really for video. So, you know, it's good. It's okay autofocus video. It's not best in class, and it's not there with the X-T4 and XS10. But for stills, it's pretty much spot on. It's pretty close to the other cameras. You've got all the same modes as I talked about in my X-T4 video. If you want more details on that, then just have a watch of that video. The only difference is the tracking mode doesn't have a square reticle that goes around it. It sort of has several little squares, a cluster of squares that follow the object you're tracking. So it's not quite as intuitive. Whether Fuji will fix that in a firmware update, I don't know, because technically the X-T30 Mark II has the updated firmware and is intrinsically the same camera inside as the X100V. But from the point of view of stills, which is what this camera is aimed at, because your video is restricted to 10-minute clips, I think, for 4K, just as capable as the X-T30, but and it's same restrictions in a sense, because the camera gets quite warm on video. But you're using this camera, I think, for stills. It'll do video, but stills, documentary, street photography, discrete photography is what you're kind of doing with this camera. So I've owned this camera for a year now, as I said, and I've thoroughly enjoyed using it and love using it every time I come out. Sometimes the 23mm focal length can be a bit short, can be a bit of a problem, but like I say, getting close to this camera is not hard, because people don't see it as a serious camera. They think you're shooting with a retro or an old camera, or it's more of a curiosity. So from that aspect, it's been a very pleasant camera to shoot with. I love the option to use an optical viewfinder. I love the fact that I've got a high quality viewfinder. I don't worry about the camera getting wet, and I've used it in the rain and it wasn't a problem. So as I say, the camera's weather sealed, it's lightweight, you can put it in a pocket. I use a little Peak Design wrist strap with it, so it's just attached to my my wrist, and very easy to sort of keep safe on the end of your hand, if you like. I found the grip, as I said earlier, very easy to use, and the camera is certainly not too heavy. It does everything I want in a subtle street camera, and I would say, as anybody getting into street photography, 23mm is the sweet spot on a cropped APS-C camera for getting started with it. You can do it with all focal lengths, to be honest. Look at all my POV videos from before, and you'll see that I've used all sorts of focal lengths to do this. So it's an expensive camera, coming in at £1,300. It's a lot of money. Thought long and hard before buying it, but I did put the money in, and I'm not disappointed. I'm glad I saved hard for it. But you know, if you just wanted one simple camera that can do everything, and you can get attachments that make the lens wide. I think you can get an attachment that makes the lens 18mm, and one that makes it 35mm. All sorts of accessories you can get for the camera, as I said, I touched on earlier as well. It's well worth getting. It's fixed lens camera. You can't. It's not interchangeable. So, but you do have that ability to add those accessories on and give you some flexibility. But that's not what this camera is about. This camera is about the joy of photography and the process of taking pictures. And if you enjoy that and you enjoy a beautiful product to do that with, the X100V is the camera for you. And I absolutely love mine. It's an amazing camera. And I hope to have many more happy years using it, especially as I recover from my COVID pneumonia. I'm getting in a bit more, and it was the first camera I used because it's so lightweight. And I could just pop it in my pocket. Didn't even need a bag. Although it's an expensive camera, and I would recommend a small bag to protect it. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this little review of my X100V. And again, if you have any questions, post them below and I'm happy to discuss and chat, or any suggestions for future videos. Anyway, if you liked the video, please remember to like, subscribe and click the bell for notifications, and I will see you all very soon. Bye!